Home is there,
归是方有在
far away there.
淮南处
My wandering heart, on a foreign night, in the fall rain, when the sadness of the cold wind was at its most frigid. From the upper rooms of my home, I heard the cry of wild geese
不厌鸟和处
who have just flown by.
归是方有在
What you've just heard is several different versions of an originally Chinese poem. You heard the original Chinese, an English translation, a Czech translation made in 1940 by Czech poet, and Pavel Hase's setting of one of his 4 songs on Chinese poetry composed in Terezin in 1942. We began in this manner to suggest that these texts are a series of translations which blend together or run like the skin of an onion. And we're going to ask questions about what translation is and what it means to translate, what's a translation, what's a paraphrase, and of course, what kind of translation is it when you move from text to music? Is it a translation that's simply one of many on the chain, or is it something qualitatively different? And we'll also be asking about issues of pieces composed in a censored environment and questions of musical form as well. So we'll begin by reading the various texts that eventually came together in Pavel Hase's songs. I'll tell some stories based on documents in history about the particular inception of this cycle and something about the poet. And then you'll hear them, and at the end, hopefully we'll hear all of the songs together. Together meaning the singer Daniel Armstrong, the pianist Mitsuko Morikawa, the translator and reader Bill Porter, and the actor and speaker Fred Melamed. I'm Michael Beckerman. We'll begin with the first poem.
Well, first of all, I have to apologize to you. I'm not drunk enough. When I was first started studying Chinese, my calligraphy teacher was teaching me poetry, and I said, I heard that the Chinese never read poetry. He said, that's true. They never read poetry, they sing it. And so I said, well, I'm not musically inclined, how do I sing it? He said, just a minute. He went into another room, brought back a bottle of whiskey, said, this is how you sing it. So you'll have to excuse me, I didn't get my whiskey. 古原苗何处，归是方有在。淮南秋雨夜，高柴闻言来。
Hearing wild geese. My old garden is somewhere in the distance. Thoughts of going home never cease. On a rainy fall night in Huainan, from my quarters upstairs, I hear geese.
This is a Czech translation made by Bohumil Matthesius in 1940, one of several books of Chinese poetry that he translated, and as you'll be able to see, it's really more of a paraphrase. Zaslech jsem divoké husy, domov tam, daleko tam, mělo být domu zblodilé srdce, za cizí noci v podzimním dešti, když nejvíc studil smutku chladný ván, ve vysokém domě svém zaslechl jsem křik divokých husí, právě přiletli.
Here it is from Czech into English. I heard the wild geese. Home is there, far away there. My wandering heart on a foreign night in the fall rain, when the sadness of the cold wind was at its most frigid. From the upper rooms of my home, I heard the cry of wild geese who've just flown by.
Just a note, you'll notice that Fred read "just flown by." The translation you'll see, if you can see it, says "flying by." It's difficult to know what to do with the Czech "pravě přiletli" that have just gotten there, but also iterative "flying by." And it's difficult, again, to capture the flavor of this Czech poem, just as it was very difficult for the Czech poet, as we'll see a little bit later, to capture the flavor of the original Chinese. This is the program for the first performance of this cycle in June 22nd, 1944 in Terezín. A day that occupies a kind of extraordinary moment. It was performed the night before the famous Red Cross visit, where the Red Cross came to Terezín to make sure that everything was okay, and even though there are different versions of it, they were pretty much fooled. Many of the people in the camp claimed to have been demoralized, that the Red Cross was unable to uncover the fact that Terezín was largely a Potemkin village, pretending to look normal and covering a horrible place. Part of the subterfuge, which implicates all of us and the composers in the ethical and moral ambiguity created by that regime, was the fact that music was part of the subterfuge. Music was part of the game to fool the Red Cross into thinking that Terezín was a normal place. Many performances had occurred in Terezín, and according to the bass, Carol Behrman, the dedicatee of the cycle, they had decided to do a program, and they had Hugo Wolf's Michelangelo songs, Beethoven's To a Distant Beloved, and Dvorak's gypsy melodies, gypsy songs. And they wanted a song cycle that would somehow make a statement. He didn't elaborate on what kind of statement, a statement of subterfuge, perhaps. And they asked Pavel Haas, the composer, to do it. And he said, well, I've got this book of Chinese poems, and I'll look at it. Haas had set several Chinese poems before, but clearly Haas, like the translator and paraphraser Mathesius, noted some similarity between the conditions of these poets in 8th, 9th century China and current conditions. Wars, pestilence, exile, loneliness, longing for home were the themes of these poems, and they also are the themes of Haas's cycle. So before, though, we get to the music, there's another level of translation that can take place, and this is the part where the composer changes the text. So I'm going to ask Fred to read it, and what you'll see in boldface are the bits, the texts that Pavel Haas repeats in his setting of it. Please, Fred.
Home is there, far, far, far away, far away. You should be home, my wandering heart. Far away there, home, home, on a foreign night in the autumn rain, when the sadness of the cold wind was at its most frigid. From the upper rooms of my home, I heard the cry of wild geese who have just flown by. Home is far away.
So you can see again that the theme of home and distance becomes a complete structural alteration of that poem. Now, the closing lines, Domov je daleko tam, home is far away there. There have been suggestions that Haas might have intended that as a subtitle for this text. And you can see on this bit of manuscript the date of the 24th of February 1944 when it was completed. You probably heard at the beginning, and you'll hear again, a motive of 4 notes. And that's an important part of this cycle that has, of course, musical importance, but it also has a kind of uncanny symbolic resonance, which we'll get to later when we explore it. I want to note a couple of connections. Pavel Haas was a student of Leos Janáček. Haas was from Brno. His brother was a famous actor and studied with Janáček in his master class. One thing that's kind of an aside, considering this afternoon's discussion, particularly about Jewish music, it would be a good question about how we want to view Haas in this sense. Haas was in a concentration camp, in a ghetto, because he was a Jew, and yet the symbols that animate this song cycle are not Jewish symbols at all, but rather Czech and even specifically Moravian symbols. Here we have the opening of the cycle, as you heard it when we did our little soup together. With this kind of staggering accompaniment, and that seems to have had some kind of relationship to this kind of writing, and this is Janáček's, one of the Moravian dances for piano. So again, this opening with these 4 notes and this staggered sound, it becomes the sound world for this piece that's established, along with the singing of this text. The mood is interrupted quite suddenly. There would be obviously many ways to set this text. From the upper rooms of my house, I heard the cries of the wild geese. And Haas separates it. And not only do we have a sudden level of intensity that appears in the song, something that I don't think one would have imagined simply by reading that text, but we actually hear in a very Janáčkian way, like something out of the Cunning Little Vixen opera, the sound of the wild geese as they flap their wings by. And as you'll hear, when the beating of the goose wings subsides, you'll have the last line of the song, Home is There, which returns to this somber opening. I wanted to mention a couple of things. The wild goose is a symbol that can be found in many times and places from ancient Egypt onward, and it has also a special resonance in Moravia, and perhaps even a special resonance in Terezín. Gideon Klein's famous trio, the last piece written in Terezín, completed in October of 1944, just before Klein and the rest of these composers were taken to Auschwitz. and all eventually died. His last piece is a theme and variations on a Moravian song about shooting the wild goose. And this is another Moravian song, which is one of my favorites, and you'll just hear the second verse. If I were a wild goose, I would fly into the corner of the heavens, about a woman jealous about her lover. When we first started thinking about this, Bill and I had several discussions about the poem and the original Chinese poem and how one could read it. And I thought I would ask him to say a few words about it. One of the difficulties of translation as we know it is the fact that we sense it's a complete impossibility to load into the translations all the context that one might or should have to really grasp a poem. But I wonder if you could say something about this poem written at that time and how a contemporary reader might have looked at it or might have understood it.
Well, as you said earlier, all of these poems that were selected by Haas were written by exiles, people who were banished. In Chinese symbology, the wild goose is the mail carrier of the hopelessly separated. There's some stories long, long ago about tying a letter to a goose. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so when you see a wild goose in Chinese poetry, it's a letter. It's a letter coming from somebody from whom you can't possibly reach. Mm. And of course, the Chinese poem talks about an old garden. Haas, or the translator, translates a home, mm-hmm. Which is sort of the same. But for the Chinese person, a home is only where you have your garden. So a garden is your real home, whereas a home could be almost anywhere, your residence. Another curious thing is in the Czech. There are these two lines that are sort of interpolated, just appear out of nowhere. They have no corresponding place in the Chinese. As you know, when the sadness of the cold wind was at its most frigid. There's nothing about a cold wind, nothing about sadness, mm-hmm. nothing about a cold wind or most being frigid. Of course, the beauty of any poem is it says things without saying them. And perhaps the translator, the Czech translator, felt it was necessary to say these things, to make it more explicit.
And for example, the fact that it's autumn, could you say something? Where's the goose coming from? Where's the poet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's been exiled down to the Yangtze, which is central China, and he's from the Chang'an area near the capital in northern China, near the Yellow River. So he's been exiled down there, and it's autumn, and the goose is coming south, mm-hmm. and he hears the goose coming, but he's a local magistrate, so he's in his quarters upstairs and listening to this fall night sounds, and here's the geese. Another, I thought, interesting thing was the translator chooses that this occurs on a foreign night. Mm-hmm. He doesn't, in Chinese, of course, it's a night in Huainan. The Huainan is the scene of exile, but which would sort of, if you just use that in Czech, it would sort of disappear.
Right.
But you use the word foreign, and it has a bigger impact that the poet is in a foreign land.
I wanted to add one more, one more context of birds as letter carriers, and just tangentially introduce another group who have not really been part of this discussion but were mentioned this afternoon. This is a well-known song that the Gypsies, the Roma, sang in Auschwitz. It tells the story of a blackbird, and please take a letter to my wife. And the language of the poem is Romani. And the musical style seems to be a kind of Moravian village style which meets with a Romani tune and text. So I'll just play you a tiny bit of that. And now we'll perform the first song. Here's the text and Haas's additions in boldface. And now our second text.
独坐幽篁里，弹琴复长啸，森林人不知，明月来相照。
Bamboo retreat. Sitting alone amid dense bamboo, strumming my zither and droning. Deep in the forest, no one else knows until the bright moon looks down.
V bambusovém háji, v bambusech nejsou lidé, v bambusech sedím sám, tu na loutno zahraju tiše, tu sobě zahvízdám. Kdo, řekněte lidé, kdo ví, kde v bambusu sedím sám a na východ srpečko luny bambusem pozírám. And now Fred will read the translation in English.
This is the
In the bamboo grove.
Okay. In the bamboo grove. In the bamboo, there are no people. In the bamboo, I sit alone. Here I play quietly on the lute. Here I whistle to myself. Tell me, people, who knows where I am sitting alone in the bamboo, peering through the bamboo at the crescent moon in the east.
This is a lighter song. Haas doesn't change it too much. As you can see from the boldface, he adds one line. He repeats the loneliness or the aloneness of sitting in the bamboo. Once again, this song reflects his engagement with both Janáček and Moravian song. The opening bum 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 is as if taken from one of Janáček's folk song arrangements, and the intonation of the beginning, bamboo setne solide, pa 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 pa, it sounds just like a Moravian folk song. So he's in this particular, again, lighter song about playing and singing alone in the bamboo. He's, again, channeling Janáček and Moravian music. Song 2, please. Poem 3.
海上生明月，天涯共色时，情人怨遥夜，今夕情相思，灭度连光芒，波一绝路泽，不堪应手赠，还寝梦佳期。
Gazing at the moon and thinking of someone far away. As the moon rises out of the waves, it joins the far edges of the sky. Friends and lovers hate these long nights, thinking of each other until dawn. Because I love the light, I blow out the candles. Seeing the heavy dew, I throw on a robe. Unable to give you this in person, I go back to sleep and share it in a dream.
Daleko je měsíc domova. Z temného moře vyrůstá měsíc. V daleké zemi teď rozkvětá tež. Láska svůj truchlý daremný sen čeká na vzdálený večer. Zahasí nám světlo. Jasněji měsíc svítí v mé hoře, noční šát oblekám, chladné je jiný, ruce mé ruce, kterak jste prázdné, říci to všechno. Spánku, sen, dej mi ono vratu domů. Spánku, sen nemůžeš dát, mé toužení stále nebudí.
The English version of the Czech. The moon is far from home. The moon grows from the dark sea. In a land far away, it is rising too now. Love mourns its lost dream. It waits for a distant evening. I put out the light. The moon shines brighter on my grief. I put on night clothes. The hoarfrost is cold. My hands, you are too empty to say it all. Sleep, let me dream of returning home. Sleep, you cannot give me a dream. My longing keeps me awake.
This is the core of the cycle. For many different reasons, Haas buried in this song all kinds of personal aspects, quotations. It's the longest text. It departs quite a bit from the original. The poet has already added so many things, explaining why the moon shines brighter, and especially the line which we'll come back to, which is very difficult to translate. I spoke with, I think I used up all my favors from every Czech translator I knew, the ruce me, because literally in Czech it's my hands, how empty you are to say it all. It's not, none of them were quite sure what it meant. I translated it as my hands, you are too empty to say everything or to say what needs to be said in this context. So this seems to be an extraordinary kind of autobiographical moment. And Haas changes the text quite a bit. Oddly enough, he cuts the line, putting out the light, but adds extra repetitions of words like far away or waiting or sleep, give me a dream. Fred, do you have Haas's version there with the lines in boldface? Did I give you that?
No.
No, I don't.
This one?
Oh, the next page.
Yeah. The next page.
Yes.
Maybe you could do that.
Sure, this is Haas's version. The moon grows from the dark sea in a land far, far away. It is rising too now. Love mourns its dream. It waits. It waits for a distant evening, for a distant evening. The moon shines brighter on my grief. I put on night clothes. The hoarfrost is cold. My hands, you are too empty to say it all. To say it all. Sleep. Let me dream of. Sleep. Let me dream of returning home. Home. Sleep. You cannot give me a dream. My longing keeps waking me.
The song itself begins with the same four-note motive that began the first song. Victor Ullmann, again, mentions this four-note motive as being a core of the song. What he doesn't tell you in the criticism that he wrote, Ullmann was, of course, a prisoner in Terezin as well, who wrote reviews of these concerts almost as if they were back home. But he doesn't mention what those four notes were. It's unlikely that he didn't know, and likely that a censored environment or a censoring environment not only creates censored works with bloated middles filled with secrets, but also has censored criticism, because he surely knew that these notes were a symbolic representation of the Czech homeland, taken from St. Wenceslas' hymn Svatý Václav, the old Czech chorale, a prayer to St. Wenceslas, but also a prayer for the safety and survival of the Czech people. For Haas, this tune was almost an obsession. We use the word obsession maybe too often when we talk about music. We talk about Beethoven or Schumann's obsessive repetition of a motive, not wanting to ascribe to them necessarily any neurosis or anxiety. But this, I believe, is an almost obsessive invocation of this theme. One of the key moments is when speaking about the distant evening, the vdalený večer, you hear the four-note motive, then it doubles its speed, and at the end you hear the tune, and I'll demonstrate that. So this is the passage from the middle of the middle song. Four notes. Doubled speed. And here. So just that bit again, this ending. And that's this hymn. So that's, Haas is quoting this tune. It permeates the cycle to preserve us. Don't let the future perish. And so when I say it's an obsession, in 1939, directly on the heels of the Nazi invasion, Haas wrote a piece. We're not quite sure what it originally was. His biographer believes it was originally to be a texted work protesting the German invasion. Haas, perhaps again for reasons of censorship, turned it into an oboe suite, and here's the middle movement. When Haas was taken away to Terezin in 1941, he was in the middle of writing a symphony which remained unfinished, and here's a moment right in the smack in the middle of that symphony. So this tune meant everything to Haas, and it appears in various guises. But I also want to call your attention to this critical moment, which you'll hear. It's an unmissable moment that occurs in the middle of this song. Right after that moment, it's the moment with the hands. Hands, you are too empty. And here's what it sounds like. And again, the texture completely changes from this boo-doo-doo-doo to something utterly different. So, hands that are too empty, hands that are empty to say anything. Now, he has used this also in the oboe suite, but I believe it has another source. Again, I've mentioned that Haas was a pupil of Janáček's, and one work which was beloved by everyone in Terezín was performed there, and Haas particularly loved it, was Janáček's Diary of One Who Vanished, about a young Czech boy from a good family who falls in love with, is eroticized by, and runs off with a Roma, a gypsy woman. So again, here's the moment from Haas. The hands. And this is the passage from Janáček's Diary of One Who Vanished, where the Czech boy who's becoming dizzy with his infatuation with this gypsy girl says, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Why don't you go out? Why don't you go away? Go out into the world. So here's what it sounds like. And this part. So why would Janáček quote, why would Haas quote Janáček at that particular moment? The answer is, I don't know. But I believe that it is a kind of transference, that he's taken the text, and this is the kind of thing that an art song can do, and a kind of thing that you can do in this particular censored environment, where I believe he's co-opting Janáček's motives and text. And on the one hand, the text of the Haas song is, my hands are too empty to say anything. But by quoting this passage from Janáček, where the text is about going out into the world, it's as if he's conflated Janáček's going out into the world, why don't you go out into the world, with the emptiness of his hands at that moment. So it becomes his own cry. His hands are filled with this inability to do anything. And I think it's an extraordinary moment at the very core of this. So now we'll hear Song 3.
Stay
So you can hear that the hands that are too empty to say anything metaphorically releases into a wordless piano postlude, which brings up all the ideas of the composition, and I don't know if you can hear it, but merges the hands motive with the St. Wenceslas motive at the end in a kind of a powerful moment. And now we'll read the last song, the last poem.
The last poem is rather different. It's rather modern. All the lines are different lengths, and so it's probably from about 200 years ago. 竹林在风中摇动，月儿坐在石头上，天地间震动着叶芽，鸡翅像阴影中的飞奔。我无眠地躺着，思索着我们的重逢，随着我快乐地高歌，唤醒了新的一天。
The bamboo sways in the wind. The moon rests on top of the rocks. Wild ducks flying between heaven and earth, wing to wing, hurry into the shadows. Lying here, unable to sleep, I imagine us meeting again. It makes me so happy, I sing out loud and wake up a new day.
Noc. Vietrem se bambus houpa, na kamen měsíc sed. Do chvění mlečné dráhy stín divoké kachny v let. Na naše sledání myslím, víčka má mý sen, zatím, co radosti zpívám, strach repot vzbuzí už den.
In the English translation of the Czech version, a sleepless night. The wind sways the bamboo. The moon sits on a stone. The shadow of a wild duck flies to the trembling Milky Way. I'm thinking of our reunion. A dream passes through my eyelids. While I sing for joy, the magpie's call already wakes the day.
So Haas, again, creates a translation of the paraphrase. He adds a line, I am thinking of our reunion, repeats the dream passing through his eyelids. I sing for joy, I sing, and then an extra already wakes the day, and then, as you can see, 32 la-la-las that are nowhere present in the poem, but form the conclusion to this piece. Once again, it seems to be referencing motives from this oboe suite, which again, according to his biographer, had a text, but Haas removed it. So it quotes that, and then at the end we have this passage again with all the singing, and it also ends in a wordless patter of a kind of Moravian song stylization. Song 4, please. So we're left with many questions. So what's the ending? Is the ending really the joy of reunion? Is it just simply something that everybody who listens to it knows is some kind of imaginary conclusion? Or is it really there to, my view, protect these very delicate, vulnerable, coded spaces in the middle that represent the reality of the condition, and that the song itself and the cycles themselves are a dialogue between dream and reality, with one intruding constantly into the other? I'd like to ask the singer and the pianist if they would perform the four pieces together as a cycle, as a way of concluding. But before that, I wanted to ask Bill and Fred if you had any comments or anything you'd like to say about the poems or anything that you'd read.
Well, that one image that stuck out particularly and continues is that rather haunting image of the ineffectual hands, unable to express not only the depth of feeling, but also to do anything about the plight of the people who own the hands. When people endure really horrible things like internment in a concentration camp, one of the things they experience is this depersonalization phenomenon. And one of the cardinal signs of that is that people cease to recognize their hands as their own. They look down at their hands and they don't, I think under ordinary circumstances, we view our hands as our subordinates that do our bidding without much thought, usually. What's that famous line in the Bible about, let my right hand forget its cunning before I would forget thee, O Jerusalem? We don't think about that much, but you could be so beaten down and so discouraged and so taken away from every vestige of what it means to be you, that the things that normally you rely upon depart you. And that really stuck to me. Also, Bill was telling me that in order to be even a sort of mid-level Chinese functionary, you had to be pretty adept at poetry. That was kind of like part of the exam, I gather.
Yeah.
So it was a very different time, not like today where you could be a bus driver and hardly be a poet at all.
One thing I would add is that these are poems. The Chinese have a word for poetry. Confucius edited the book of poetry around the 5th century BC. And nobody really defined the word poetry until around the 2nd century BC. Somebody finally defined it, said, poetry is words from the heart, as opposed to prose, which is words from the head. And it's not an accident that somebody like Haas or any other composer turns to poetry to compose songs and not some philosophical text. So there's a great deal of power in these translations of the Chinese, of the Czech poet who is translating them, and also in Haas's emendations of them.
You know, one of the key questions which is raised today, but be raised all the time, is to what extent do these stories about the music affect the way we listen? Do they deprive the music of its integrity by providing a story? Do we need to know that the poet's in exile to the south and the goose is coming from the north to appreciate the poem? Do we need to know anything about Haas's incarceration to appreciate the songs? There's no final answer on any of that. It's always an individual question. But the Haas cycle illustrates something that I'm sure of all the time, that music doesn't tell its stories the way prose stories tell, from beginning to end. Music quite often tells its stories from the inside out. And this seems to be the kind of piece that has at its core what it really wants to say is buried here and there. And analytical methods that don't differentiate or don't take risks in trying to figure out which pieces of the puzzle are the important ones would be like a literary critic deciding that the most important part of a particular fairy tale was Once Upon a Time, rather than the stunning, unpredictable fantasy events in the middle. So thank you for your kind attention, and now we'd like to ask for the cycle in full, and we'll close with that.
La la la